Hello and welcome to this session, Nudging Inclusive Behavior in New Managers Without the Backlash or DEI talk. My name is Anna Jakielaszek. Very briefly, I'll introduce myself. I have master's degree in sociology from Wrocław University. Then I spent 12 years in the UK where I worked as a HR business partner, specialist, generalist. I think the most interesting part for this context is the last couple of years I spent working as a HR business partner for technology, and there are great insights, agile ways of working, design thinking I definitely have been influenced by. And since I moved to consultancy, I do training, coaching, consultancy for startups, international organizations, where I focus on leadership development, change management, communication, and obviously I do talk about diversity and inclusion as well. And in this session, we will focus on driving inclusive behaviors without talking about it. And I like to connect the dots, to hack the dots. So what you can expect, we will go through some insights on the topic and then see how can we hack it through nudging. So I'll cover nudging, and I am leaving the cherry on the cake for the very last. If there was one tool that managers would like to have, that I could only give one tool that could be very effective for them, but also inclusive, that's this one magic thing that I share, and I know it's very, very impactful. So that's at the end. But what we'll be focusing on, as I said, nudging inclusive behavior in new managers. And I wanted to start with two brief disclaimer. Disclaimer number one is that I am for sure biased towards the line managers, positively biased. So having worked with them for so many years, I have empathy for them. I feel like I do understand. I know I understand the challenges, the worries, and that really informs my approach to, for example, training, design, and delivery. My starting default is they want to do well, they care about the employees, they want to be diverse, inclusive leaders, even if they wouldn't name it in that exact way. And I don't really have any preferences or what have you. Either they are what kind of gender they are, where they're coming from. I'm very inclusive in that, right? And this is an example of the managers in the EU. So 34% of managers are women, but a nice honorable mention for Poland and Latvia, but we still know majority are men, and I'm very positively biased towards them as well. And the second disclaimer is that it's not that companies come to me and say, "Hey Anna, can you create an inclusive workshop and training program?" And then they give me 6 months for lots of modules, one-to-one coaching, extra projects to do. No, they say, "Hey, for example, we need a training for new leaders." And the nudgers, their approach I will be sharing with you is based on a program that lasts 6 months, that we have face-to-face first, then we have online sessions in every so often, every 2 to 3 weeks. There is a one-to-one coaching with the training participants. There are peer sessions in between the online modules. There is a project to deliver in the end. So it's quite complex, comprehensive approach and program. And I know also from our conversations in the conference that it's not that the companies ever give 6 months comprehensive training program to drive inclusive behaviors, but they do for new leaders program. And disclaimer that links to it is that I didn't start with inclusion in mind. I started with the new managers in mind and how can we help them grow. And through my interest and the needs of today's workplaces, I actually realized, hey, I am building inclusive behaviors. That was the other way around. And so I don't think, as you will be hearing about, nudging inclusive behaviors without talking about diversity and inclusion, I don't think that we should not talk about it at all. I think that with the topic as complex as diversity and inclusion and as diverse, we know from research we need representation. That's very important for minorities. But I also want to say, let's do this and let's do other intervention that can help us drive inclusive behaviors, because just doing training is not easy. It's not always impactful the way we would like it to be. Why? Let's connect some dots first, shall we? So the first dot I wanted to connect is the first insight. Very briefly, we know that diversity matters, we know that inclusion matters and is beneficial to employees and their organization. So this is just one of the studies from McKinsey. But another important dot to connect is that estimated 75% of diversity training yield little to no effect, can even increase bias. That's Dobbin and Kalev. So diversity training is not really effective. And why? I mean, there are lots of insights from that study, Dobbin and Kalev, one of them being training being mandatory, or how we talk about bias can actually reinforce the bias. But another also important insight is coming, for example, from this study from University of California of Santa Barbara, where they say young white men interviewing for pro-diversity companies, so the company that uses that language, displayed a cardiovascular profile characteristic of threat. And we know from psychology, other studies, that actually their majority, if you like, can feel threatened by those topics. And when we feel threatened, we don't engage with the content, and actually that can create a resistance. So, and as we know from the previous slides, that majority of the line managers are men. If we alienate them, if we don't have that empathy for them, we're not going to achieve what we want through the diversity on inclusion training. And finally, one of those dots I wanted to share, which we know there's way more to it, but again, coming from this Dobbin research and an article for Harvard Business Review, some of the most effective solutions aren't even designed with diversity in mind. And I was like, yeah, exactly. That's wow, how timely sentence to read. I'm just going to show one of those examples when I've designed a training not with diversity in mind, but with new leaders in mind. But actually, I realized that what I'm doing, I am giving them I'm actually impacting them engaging in inclusive behaviors. So with that in mind, what insights can we have? Very briefly, I think oversimplified, I guess, but traditional approach to diversity training is that we start with the minority in mind. We want to kind of force the line managers in this context to walk in the minority shoes. We hope to create an insight, an aha moment that will lead to change of the behavior. But what actually is happening based on the psychology findings is that managers take it as a threat. Oh, are you talking that I am not a good person, that I am, is there something wrong about me? We don't want to hear that. And instead of walking in the shoes, they just walk away, metaphorically speaking. So all efforts often fail because they don't address intrinsic motivation or real world relevance. That's a very important thing to remember. How, like, if we want to start thinking about hacking the dots, is we need to create an intrinsic motivation in the managers in this context and make it really relevant to the real world day to day. So how can we do that? Nudge can be useful. What does nudge mean? Let me show you with based on an example from my hometown now when I live in Norway. So this is how they solve the problem of not littering on a bus stop. They put this ashtray, shall I say, where there's a question that, by the way, changes quite often. And in this example says, would you like to have an extra arm or an extra foot? And you basically throw away your cigarette by voting on the answer. Another example from my town, this is now in the springtime. Another question, would you like to travel 100 years back or 100 years forward? So again, they don't litter on the bus stop or on the pathway, they just vote. So yes, we could just do it in a traditional way to say, don't litter, that's going to be a penalty of whatever amount of money. But what really we are doing, we are nudging the behavior. So this is a small change in the way choices are presented that gently influences behavior without limiting options or drastically changing incentives. So example, let's say in a school canteen, putting fruit at eye level counts as a nudge, but banning junk food does not. And I think that's a good example of what it is. And this is from Taylor and Sunstein, who were the first, I guess, to popularize the term of nudging. And if you're interested, there's research, there are books, resources on nudges in the field of diversity and inclusion. So maybe you have came across them, or if not, have a look. That may be of interest. So in the context of training, we can nudge changing the process. We can also nudge by helping them create an insight that will lead to a change of the behavior. So one of the nudges that I want to propose is the process. So first, I said traditionally we start with minority in mind, but actually by reversing the order and starting with the manager, the training participant in mind, can actually nudge the change of the behavior that we want. So I do start with the managers, understanding them first and foremost. That helps them that create the content that leads to the real world situations, that in turn creates this aha moment. Oh, okay, actually I am doing things in this way, maybe I could do them differently, that lead to a happy, inclusive, diverse team. Obviously, I know it's a simplified approach, but in essence, that philosophy actually nudges the change in the way they engage with the training. So let's start with this first point, empathy. Before any training, we do ask participants what they would need from the training, but also I do like to do it when they are in the room. And as I mentioned, because this is now nudged, framed as not as an inclusive training, but now it is the new leaders training. So the company give us the 2 days of face-to-face time. Fantastic luxury. I don't take it for granted. And but when we have it, we use the nice pen and paper, post-it note, and I ask them what they need from the training. And this is a real starting important point of what's going on for the managers when we want to engage with them and create that intrinsic motivation. So a type of questions I often hear is, what is the craft of management? What does it feel like to be in the groove? Very often they ask about the principles, like never mind being an inclusive, innovative leader. Like I need the basics. I need to stand confidently on the ground first. I really have to understand what it is to be a manager. What does it mean to me? Another type of challenges they face, I see more and more, and I'm pretty sure you're not surprised. It's about mental health, it's about stress management. So how can I better handle stress management? How can I manage myself not to pass it on to others? How can I protect my team from pressure? This is something that keeps coming. That, hey, I'm a line manager. I have pressure from above. I have pressure from my team members. I put pressure on myself as well, by the way, obviously, and I have my family, hopefully, as well. So the line manager is really between those forces, and we really it's good when we appreciate that and understand. Another sort of challenges is how can I keep people focused and truly involved on the goals? Like, hey, I know as a manager, at the end of the day, I have to deliver on the goals, right? Inclusion in that content sounds like, yeah, nice to have, but hey, I've got the real thing to face, okay? Managing problematic employees. Let's pay attention to the language. It's the employee who is problematic, and now I have to manage them, right? Far from inclusion, I guess, but when we give them inclusive leadership skills, they will reframe it and change it. Difficult conversations. How can I improve the way I manage the low performance? Very often linked to the goals. Hey, I'm here to deliver. Skills for motivating the team. A lot of those. Managing expectations of the senior management. Very often the case talked about. How can I defend my team from additional no scope work coming from above, from other departments? So I do want to care, I do care about my team as well, and I don't want them to burn out either, right? So we can see that gives us the picture of the managers being under a lot of pressure. They want to do well, and they need skills to face it. Again, inclusion doesn't really show up that much here. This is the closest I get to. Build skills for managing different types of people. Again, let's pay attention to the language. I have to manage, so that's quite hard. And I can understand that there are different types of people, but there is like us and them, right? In this sentence. Another, the closest to inclusion, I guess, I got ever, this is just one of this, is moderate conflicts to build a tolerant environment. I think we mean more than tolerant when we say inclusion. And to be fair, I don't think the person was a native English speaker. Maybe they would have used a different word, but not necessarily that was in the language. But again, it shows, hey, inclusion, diversity means conflict. And I have to, manage the conflict to have a calm environment. It doesn't go into, I want to be innovative, I want to be collaborative, right? It's like, it's a burden. So it shows signs of a burden. So if we understand that that's what their environment is, this is what they are after, and help them address those problems, become more confident, we will see that actually inclusive behaviors can address difficult conversations, can motivate employees, can help us manage stress way better. We can see now that that will be helpful, but will be more effective if we speak to their needs and to their context first. So a couple of exercises I wanted to share with you that I do during specifically training. And I guess an I don't know, disclaimer I want to make is, or something to understand, is that important to say is that those exercises are not necessarily anything you would have not seen or done before yourselves. And the nudging element comes as well from framing and the process. So if I start with managers in mind first, I understand now the challenges, then I help them see the world from different perspective. That creates a moment, oh, aha, okay, I can be motivated employees more if this is what I change. Now they want to do it. So the exercise itself may not be a nudge if it's positioned in the context of, hey, the manager, this is diversity and inclusion training where I'm going to tell you what you're doing wrong and what kind of penalties are at the end of it. The effect may not be the same. So this order does matter. But having said that, what are the kind of exercises I do and how do they nudge different behaviors? So first, and one of those examples is at the very beginning, again, having the luxury of being face-to-face, I do like to do the speed dating, I guess, quick exercise when I say, find what you have in common with one another. And in that, debriefing, I think, matters, because what we find is, how did you feel when you found something in common? And they always say, you can see smiles, you can see how relaxed they were, how happy they were. And it was like, you see, those things matters, right? what do you have in common with your employees, with your team members? And there's like, oh, how do your one-to-ones look like? What kind of questions did you ask to find what you had in common? Can you use it with your one-to-ones, for example, right? And that starts to create that, on one hand, we have to move from me to we, and that feels good. But also it helps them see what behaviors do they engage on the daily basis. And also we talk about the downside of their having things in common, like, do you only surround yourself with those that you do have in common? How can you be more proactive in reaching out? So this is a nice feel good exercise that starts planting the seeds, right? Another example of this of an exercise that I feel does leads to inclusive behaviors, and again, it's the framing positioning of it that makes it work so well, is impact of the pressure on the performance, which basically say that we have Euro stress, but too much of it, when we stop feeling having that feeling of control, we can just basically go down. We don't think, we're literally stupid. And in an environment that is so pressured, this is really important to understand those processes. So again, starting point is, hey, the managers, I know you're under a lot of pressure, and in the exercise they have one-to-ones first with fellow training participants, where they can practice vulnerability, open up, understand themselves better first. So like, first me, like, how do I where do I am, where would I put myself, what are my tactics to manage stress? And then in this exercise, I do subgroups. I do like printing it on the big wall, print it on the paper, put it on the wall, and say, okay, a heart represents your team members, which, by the way, I'm priming them to think positively about the employees. A little touch that they do appreciate puts a smile on them. And where were they last week? And put it on the graph and discuss with one another. How do you recognize it? What can you do? And because pressure is such a big topic in here, they really open up and they start actually creating lots of diversity and inclusion related insights. Like, maybe there's element of, oh, actually, I realize that my pace, maybe I'm a driver, I'm too fast, that may stress somebody else out. Or I understand they have a difficult situation, or their ways of thinking is different, or whatever that may be. They actually start putting themselves in somebody else's shoes and start understanding the perspective. A very informative, not only informative, but in fact impactful session. Disclaimer: with those topics, I do always say, we're not medically trained. Your role is not to become a therapist. Look for other, talk to HR, look for other resources, so you don't manage that on your own. An important thing to say, but this is very much opening them to empathy building, but also thinking about strategies to manage that. Another example is DISC or insights, any of those profiles that can give us, an understanding. I know a simplified understanding of the human nature, but like, I'm still surprised that managers are actually surprised by discovery of it. Obviously not surprise, but it's interesting to see how they have those aha moments. First, again, starting with them, how do you operate? What insight, what works for you, what doesn't? And then what does it mean when interacting with others? So they start looking onwards. An example I've used in this example, Mentimeter, and I was talking to, say, customer service managers, and I asked them, where would you place yourself on this dimension? Where do you think a usual sales representative is, and where do you see your customer service being? And they visualize that, they map it up. And what it does, I've noticed, is that it shifts from us and them. I would say that here, those salespeople and our customer service, we just have to protect them, and they are bad, we are good, and what have you, into more common understanding. And again, now they say, okay, now I want to know how else can I communicate? What else can I do to support that conversations? And they start learning difficult conversation skills, listening skills, assertiveness and stuff like that. But that starts from, again, from me to we. A good example that also break the silos thinking. Okay, so these are the kind of exercises that do help with opening up. Another thing, inside dot that I wanted to connect and help us connect is a research that I found very interesting, which gave us some research that gave us an insight on looking for comparison between addiction and prejudice. So what they said, we know that that's probably a little bit controversial, but we wanted to look at the field that is really well researched, that has lots of practical applications and good outcome, and that's the field of addiction, and see if there's something that we can take away and apply to the field of prejudice. And they know that at the bottom of both is the need for intrinsic motivation. So you can't really change someone's addiction if they don't want to change themselves. So I'm sure we've heard that many times. Intrinsic motivation is crucial. And that's same with diversity and inclusion and prejudice. And actually, we're asking people to look at themselves and have some hear some hard truths about themselves, either it's addiction or prejudice. So what they found, one of the things that they talk about is that both prejudice and addiction can be thought of as bad habits. So acts of prejudice, such as derogatory language or biased decisions, have been described as deeply rooted and detrimental habits driven in small part, and so on. Basically, what's important, I think, is in here is that prejudice is an act of habit, as addiction is an act of habit. Both need intrinsic motivation to change, and helping managers to recognize what are the daily small behaviors, the habits that they engage in, that can actually be changed and improved, right? So that's what I think the next element of nudging comes to, like, how can I show them the daily habits? This is an example of development conversations when I do a Mentimeter or Slido exercise, when I ask managers to rate a hypothetical employee on those communication competencies, like employees' messages are brief and to the point. The emails include clear bullet points. They do not spend time on small talks. They share more details when asked about them. How would you rate them? One of the group, you can see 70% rated as 2, another 17 rated as 5. So that was like, how do we get to this point? Or another group quite in the middle, right? 3 or 4. From that, we have really good debriefing and conversation to say, hey, maybe I'm not clear on the criteria. It really depends on the criteria. Or maybe I rate them because that's my preference. I really hate when people use flowery language, but actually for the role they do, it's fine if they use flowery language. I just annoy it because I don't like it, but actually that's maybe not fair. So again, from that visualization, we look into nudges, actually, how can they change? So the nudge now becomes the change of the process. So next time they have evaluation, they make sure they have the clear criteria for evaluation. And another nudge that they come up as a solution is, next time I do evaluation, I'm going to sense check. Am I rating it because that's my own personal preference or strengths or weakness, or is it actually valid for the behavior? That way we start nudging the change. Another change in the habit is, who do you ask for advice? So we do the trusted 10 exercise, where we put what are the 10 people at work that you would ask for advice you trust. Only when they do it, I ask another dimension, put what is the gender, race, age, and so on. So again, a aha moment in terms of, usually I have majority of people I ask for advice I trust are like me. But also from this, we do have this element of debrief. What is your habit? Who do you go to? Is your team members seeing that you always go only to that one person? What are you missing out? What would have happened if you ask somebody else for advice who is completely different to you, what you can experiment with? Do you know that's your habit? So this is very much changing the perspective. And again, context matters. So I actually sometimes use this exercise for a module when I do talk about diversity and inclusion and cross-cultural communication, but this is already like a module, like, I don't know, 3 or 4, when we have had the psychological safety and so on. Sometimes it's part of just networking module. So an insight there to do. And to conclude, because obviously this is just an example of how can we engage in different types of conversations, exercises, how can we think differently, what the process could be. But I wanted to share at the end my 2 biggest, I guess, game changers and the cherry on the top. So the first one is the listening exercise. Actually, what I've noticed is a lot of aha moments comes from realization that, hey, we're very crap at listening. We always give solutions. We don't listen. We don't understand what are the needs, worries, strengths, desires of our employee. Even for development conversations, we just talk at them. Listen, practicing listening. And again, we have one-to-one coaching sessions as well, when we can do role plays, when we can really reinforce that. It does change a lot to them. And the last one that is really very impactful is the SCARF model by David Rock from Neuro Leadership Institute. And it basically, this is my golden kind of tool to go to that makes the manager be very effective, but also is rooted in the essence of us being fellow human beings, and never mind our cultural differences, our race, our gender, disabilities, and so on. And the end of the day, we're human beings. And I'm giving you this tool that helps us understand fellow human behaviors, and therefore being more impactful and more empathetic towards one another. And that is very much rooted in the needs of the day-to-day. So very briefly, SCARF says that there are 5, I like to say, buttons in our brains that if we press them, it can either create a sense of reward or a threat. And then those 5 elements are around status. So am I important? For example, am I being asked for an advice? Reward. Am I the only one who's not being asked and for advice? Threat. Certainty, well, change management, but also performance expectations. Do I know what's expected? Do I know what's coming next is very important. Autonomy. I need to have autonomy and intrinsic motivation, and I need to have options. Relateness. Do I belong? Am I actually? Do we have some heart-to-heart one-to-ones that can create that sense of reward? And obviously fairness is super important for all of us. And then, yes, when we talk about cross-cultural communication, we may say, I actually now understand that I may have triggered negatively the status because status because I just went directly to a senior manager, but actually that's skipping the line and I shouldn't have done it in this culture. Or otherwise, I'm very transactional and I'm triggering negative relateness because I'm so task-oriented that I don't engage in the small talk that is super important. So then I understand the nuances of the differences, how they impact, but at the end of the day, we all have the same operating system, and that creates that needed inclusive behaviors at the end of it and attitude. So with that in mind, there's a great study about and beyond leading uniqueness and belongingness, a systematic review of inclusive leadership research. So this is a meta-analysis. And what they said is that inclusive leadership has the potential to act as an umbrella style, integrating essential leadership behavior in a consolidated way. In other words, what they found is that actually what we would define as inclusive leadership has actually elements of all other models on what's the most essential leadership from other models. And actually that's what we need into this world. Like teaching leadership is really teaching inclusive leadership at the end of the day. And just if we skip inclusive, it turns out more people would like to do it. So that's important for us to remember, that inclusive leadership really means integrating inclusion into day-to-day. And final smile, because I said I have empathy and I really enjoy working with the line managers. At the end of the face-to-face sessions, we ask them to draw the highlights, and as you can see, they have a heart. Empathy is important. Understanding fellow humans is important. Scarf really helps us manage the pressures of today's world, and I thought this is a really nice representation that yes, it can be hard, but actually with those tools and those lenses on, we can be very successful and sail those waters more smoothly. So thank you so much for listening. I hope you found some of it useful, insightful, or maybe reassuring. And if you would like to share, connect, challenge me, ask for more, please feel free to reach out at anna.jakielaszek.com. So thank you so much and have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.